last bit of notes. Parallel and perpendicular lines. Parallel, two distinct non-vertical lines are parallel if and only if their slopes are equal. In other words, M1 is equal to M2. Slope 1 equals slope 2. Perpendicular, definition. Two non-vertical lines are perpendicular if and only if their slopes are opposite reciprocal slopes of each other. In other words, M1 is equal to negative 1 over M2. The negative is where the opposite comes from. Reciprocal, if you put 1 over a number, then you have achieved the reciprocal of the number. So, example of the perpendicular. If I have a slope that is 2/3, then the reciprocal of that, if M1 is 2/3, then the reciprocal of that would be for M2, I would flip it or put 1 over it. Now if I put 1 over 2/3, remember back from arithmetic, when I divide a fraction by a fraction, I have to flip and multiply. So this would be the same as 1 times 3 over 2. So you're flipping the fraction. So notice that when I take 1 and divide by 2/3, I just get the flip of the 2/3, which is 3 over 2. So if I want this to be the opposite reciprocal, I would do negative 1 over 2/3, which gives me a negative 3/2. So now when you look at these two slopes, M1, slope 1 is equal to 2/3, M2, slope 2 is equal to negative 3 over 2, and these two values are opposite reciprocals. So if I had two lines that had these two slopes, I would know that these two lines would be perpendicular lines. And from geometry, you should remember that perpendicular lines are two lines that intersect and they form 90-degree angles. So perpendicular lines will form 90-degree angles. Why? Because their slopes are opposite reciprocals. Okay, so that's talking about slopes. Okay, now let's find or determine the slope-intercept form of the equation of the line that passes through 2, negative 1 and is parallel to 2x minus 3y equals 5. First thing we need to do, step number 1, is we need to determine the slope of 2x minus 3y equals 5. So we're going to have to do a little bit of algebra. In other words, we got to solve for y. Get the equation to y equals form. So I'm going to take 2x minus 3y equals 5. I'm going to get y by itself. So this is what I want to get by itself. So the first thing I have to do is I have to subtract away the 2x, minus 2x on both sides. When I do that, 2x's cancel on the left side. I'm left with negative 3y equals 5 minus 2x. Why did I not combine the 5 and the 2x together? Because they are not like terms. The 5 does not have an x, the 2 does. So you can't combine them, you gotta keep them separated. Next, I need y by itself. So I have to divide by negative 3 on both sides. Once I do that, I now have y by itself. So I can simplify this. I'm going to move the negative to the top, so I got negative 5/3. Right here I've got two negatives, so that's going to make a positive 2 over 3x. Now looking at this, my slope is the one that is being multiplied by the x, or is attached to the x. So my slope is actually 2/3. So m is equal to 2/3. Alright? So I now have my slope. So now I can move on and I can find the equation of the line that is parallel to this line, which had a slope of 2/3. Now remember, if it's parallel, parallel means same slope. Parallel means same slope. So I've got 2/3 that I'm going to be using to create my new equation. The point that I'm going to be using is 2, -1. So now I'm going to go back to my point slope formula. So step 2, now use point slope formula to create the equation. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to use my point slope formula, so I'm going to write that down. My point slope formula is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. I know my m. M is equal to 2/3 because it's parallel. I also know my point. My point was, come back up here to the top, 2, -1. So this is my x1 and my y1. So just like before, when I'm creating an equation, I want to label my values. I know my m, I know my x1, I know my y1, and remember we're going to go back and we're going to plug in those spots in the formula. Substituting in, I'm now going to substitute. I have y minus, what's my y1? -1. So I'm going to put that in the blank, equals, plug in for m. M is 2/3. Following the formula, x minus, what was x1? x1 was 2, so we're going to plug that into the x1 blank. And now we simplify. So continuing to simplify, you got two negatives here. That makes y plus 1. And over here on the other side, we are going to distribute the 2/3. So 2/3 times x, 2/3 times 2. So we get 2/3 x. When you multiply fractions, out here to the side, I've got 2/3 times 2. That's the same as 2/3 times 2 over 1. When you multiply straight across. So 2 times 2 is 4. And the 3 times the 1 on the bottom is just 3. Last step. I need to get y by itself, so I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. Subtract 1. And my final answer is y equals 2/3 x. And then 4/3 take away 1. If you have 4/3 and you're taking away 1, that's the same as 4/3 take away 3/3. So you get 4 take away 3 is 1 over 3. So plus 1/3, and this is my final answer. This is the line that is parallel. So pause and record in your note. Okay, now we want to determine the equation of the line which passes through the point 2, -1, and that is perpendicular to 2x minus 3y equals 5. So just like before, we would have to solve this for y to be able to figure out what our slope is. So very quickly, we're going to do that. We're going to get the same answer as before because it's the same slope. So I subtract 2x from both sides, and then I divide by negative 3. So negative 3y equals 5 minus 2x. So I divide by negative 3 on both sides. Again, this is the same problem as before. So y is equal to negative 5/3 plus 2/3 x. And again, 2/3 is my slope because it's the number that's being multiplied by x. Now, once I have solved for y, to determine my slope, remember that I am looking for a line that is perpendicular to 2x minus 3y equals 5. Because we're looking for perpendicular, we have to go back to our idea about what it means to be perpendicular. If it's perpendicular, it has to have opposite reciprocal slopes. So if my slope is 2/3, then the one that's going to be perpendicular to it, if m1 is 2/3, then m2 needs to be the opposite, so it's going to be negative because ours was positive, and then the reciprocal, so we flip it. So negative 3/2 is going to be the slope that I'm going to use in my formula. So step 2 now that I've determined my slope, step 2, now we're going to plug into the point slope formula. So y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. We still have the same point that we're using, which is 2, negative 1. We're going to label it and plug in. So x1, y1, plugging in the same places we were plugging in before. So we got y minus y1 is negative 1 equals m, that's our negative 3/2 now, this is what we're plugging in, times x minus x1, which is 2. And the last thing we need to do is simplify and solve for y. So simplifying, get a double negative, that makes y plus 1 equals, distribute, negative 3/2 times x, negative 3/2 times a negative 2. So we get negative 3/2 x, negative 3/2 times 2, negative 2, over 1. We get positive 6, multiplying straight across, over 2, which simplifies to 3. So negative 3/2 times negative 2 becomes a positive 3. Last but not least, subtract 1 from both sides, and y is equal to negative 3/2 x plus 2. And that is our final answer. That is the equation of the line that is perpendicular to the line 2x minus 3y equals 5, passing through the point 2, negative 1.